Some people are born loved. As for me, I had to fight for every ounce of respect in my own family. For 7 years, I sat in silence as they mocked me, laughed at me for not having a husband, not having children, not having someone to take me home. And every time my grandmother would strike with her sharpest line, 33 years old, and not even an orphanage would take you in. But this year was different. This year I did not come alone. I came with the man they once called a failure. Now he is the CEO of the most prestigious luxury garage chain on the East Coast. And when he walked into that hall, pulled out a 10-carat diamond ring. I knew the most elegant revenge had begun. This is my story, a story of pain, of silence, and of a comeback so fierce it forced my entire family to bow their heads. I am Crystal, and you are about to hear the truth. Chapter 1, The Invisible Slap. It was the same every year. The same room, the same people, the same pitying glances hidden behind counterfeit friendliness. And this year, as always, it was her, Mrs. Karen, with her sharp metallic voice and that clap of hands as if I were a 6-year-old child who needed disciplining. Still no ring, Crystal. At your age, even if you begged an orphanage to take you in, they wouldn't accept you. The whole room froze for exactly 1 beat. Then, the chuckles rippled outward like waves crashing into my face. I didn't turn my head, but I knew. Whose eyes looked at me with pity. Who snickered behind my back. Who sighed and shook their heads in that girl is beyond hope way. I was far too familiar with this play. So familiar that every one of her lines was etched like a tape recording in my mind, replayed at every family reunion. The old folding plastic chair beneath me felt icy cold, though outside it was the peak of summer. I was 33 this year, still living alone, still no one to bring home for introductions, and to my family that was a suspended sentence dangling above my head, waiting for an occasion like this to be declared out loud. And the one holding the gavel, as always, was her. Uncle Pete busied himself with a limp salad as though it were a work of art. Aunt Susan let out her signature, tusk, tusk, her head tilting with feigned regret. And Mike, my cousin, who thought I existed solely for holiday entertainment, was smirking behind his beer can. My mother sat beside me, hands interlocked tightly on her lap. She said nothing. She didn't look at me, just stared down as though her silence exempted her from being part of this execution. But her silence year after year was the sharpest cut, because she was the one who should have stood by me. And yet, I drew a breath, forcing a calm expression, my lips shaped into a slight smile. You always know how to make me feel special, don't you? I didn't raise my voice. Just enough for her to hear, just enough for others to think I was thanking her instead of mocking her. But I caught Rachel, my cousin, lifting her gaze at me, startled. At least someone understood. My phone buzzed softly in my pocket. A message lit up on my way. 5 minutes. My hand brushed against my pocket instinctively, as if confirming the existence of a secret hope. Out in the car, a velvet box sat in the trunk, heavier than anything I'd ever carried here. Yet I kept my same expression, kept sitting there, letting her think she'd won yet again. It had been 7 years since that fateful day. 7 years of showing up here, convincing myself I'd be fine, only to leave each time in silence and disappointment. Every word of hers was like a needle, not drawing blood, but piercing deep into my pride. I once thought I'd grown used to it, thought I was strong enough not to care anymore. But no, this pain never dulled with time. It only buried deeper. And this year I didn't plan to let it lie dormant. I knew she wouldn't stop. She didn't know I'd been recording her words for 2 years on my therapist's suggestion, not to expose her, but to remind myself that this wasn't my fault, that her cruelty was real, that I had every right to feel hurt. I looked up at her. The pearl necklace she always wore at special gatherings, as though it were a shield of her fabricated authority, caught the pale light, but for some reason it looked strangely faded tonight. I only care about you, Crystal, she continued, as if following a script rehearsed year after year. A woman your age living alone clearly has issues. When I was your age, I already had 3 kids and a husband who earned good money. I nodded. Yes. Your time really was different, she arched a brow. Different how women always need someone beside them to take care of them, to provide stability to bear children. I glanced at the clock. 2 minutes left. I didn't feel angry anymore, only expectant, like an artist sensing the climax of a performance approaching. And this time, I was the one rewriting the script. Chapter 2:7. Empty years in a life overflowing. Someone once said, loneliness isn't about having no one beside you. It's when you sit in the middle of a crowd smiling and realize that no one truly understands you. I had lived like that for 7 years. Since the day Stephen left, I had thrown myself into work like a fugitive, running from something. Everyone thought I was strong. They saw me climbing fast. They saw me independent, traveling alone, dining alone, laughing in meetings full of bravado. But they never knew. I no longer remembered what love felt like. I didn't dare to love, didn't dare to trust, didn't dare to let anyone step into the world I had built like a fortress. Not because I was arrogant, but because I was afraid. Afraid that if I let my heart soften just once more, it would be crushed again by the very people I called family. I had dated a few times, men with stable jobs, polite manners, proper lives. But after only a few meetings, I felt suffocated. A laugh too loud was enough for me to dismiss them. A single question about the future was enough for me to turn cold. I said we weren't compatible, but the truth was in my head. There was always that familiar voice whispering, would she accept this one? Would Mom look at him with the same contempt she once had for Stephen? I thought I had escaped the past. But unconsciously, I had become a victim of the very prejudice I despised. Each time I walked into a date, I felt like I was sitting an exam to win her approval. I stopped loving people. I began to love work. I worked day and night. I won awards. I became a senior manager with my own office, with a reputation. I bought the car I liked. I decorated my apartment like a showroom unit, perfect, elegant, and cold. I had everything, except the feeling of someone waiting for me to come home. My kitchen was so spotless, it held no trace of food. My fridge was full of organic products, but most of them existed just for Instagram photos. My bedroom was always neat because there was never anyone turning in the night beside me. My home resembled a showroom, beautiful but untouchable. I began to avoid family events, but I still showed up once a year, as if punishing myself. Each time I became the main act in their comedy titled Crystal the Successful Woman, No One Marries. There were days I sat alone on my balcony watching the traffic below, wondering, where is Stephen now? Is he well? Has he ever thought of me? I had deleted his number once, but I never erased his shadow from my mind. Sometimes I thought I regretted letting him go, but the truth was even more bitter. I had pushed him away because I hadn't dared to face her wrath, nor my mother's silence. I chose my family's approval over love, and I paid the price for 7 long, dragging years. I lived a life that wasn't wrong, but wasn't right either. A life beautiful on paper, but hollow inside. People called me a model of the modern woman, but only I knew. I was just a lonely girl desperately proving I was fine. Eventually, I couldn't even remember the last time I had laughed with my whole heart. Perhaps it was on that Sunday afternoon, years ago, when Stephen and I sat peeling peanuts on the porch talking about nameless dreams, and he gently touched my cheek, saying, "You don't have to try to be strong with me. You just need to be yourself." But I hadn't dared to be myself, because I didn't even know who I was. If not the girl who earned her family's acceptance, I wondered if I had chosen differently that day. Would I still be the one sitting here counting each mocking laugh year after year? And then, One day fate brought him back. Unexpected, no message, no warning. He simply appeared, and everything began to change. Chapter 3. Meeting the one who once was. Everything I never believed in fate, but that day I had no choice but to believe. That afternoon I had just finished a grueling meeting with an important client. The pressure weighed heavy on my shoulders, my head still spinning with endless numbers, targets, and the plastered smiles of business etiquette. All I wanted was a cup of coffee, bitter strong to anchor me back to the ground. I walked out of the office building eyes on my phone, fumbling to call a cab. Maybe because I was too exhausted, I didn't notice what was in front of me. And then, crash. Papers scattered across the pavement. My phone flew sliding so far I felt my heart drop. I bent down quickly, not yet forming the word sorry, when a voice spoke deep, warm, achingly familiar. Crystal. I froze. I looked up and it was him. It was Stephen. In that moment, I couldn't hear the cars, the people, or anything else. Everything stood still. He crouched down to help me gather the papers, and when he handed me my phone, his eyes met mine. Still those eyes, the ones that once looked at me as if I was his entire world. But now, something was different. A steadiness, a confidence, a strength I'd never seen before. Gone was the hesitant, wounded boy from 7 years ago. The man standing before me had changed. A tailored suit, polished shoes, a faint trace of cologne that was masculine, yet refined. And when he smiled, the very smile that once made me feel safest, I knew. I had never forgotten him. Not once. You still don't watch where you're going, do you? He teased his gaze, both gentle and sharper than before. I let out a soft laugh. Words failed me. My heart pounded so loudly, I feared he might hear it. We stood there for a few seconds, a few years in silence, like two characters abruptly pulled back into a memory we had both tried to bury. He invited me into the cafe next door. I didn't say no, I couldn't. We sat across from each other, a steaming cup of coffee between us, as if trying to warm the 7-year void that had carved itself into our lives. He still remembered my order extra cream, 1 spoon of sugar, like always, and that alone hurt in a sweet, aching way. I asked about his life. He told me, honestly. No embellishment, no bragging, but no concealment either. After we broke up, he left everything, the old job, the old city, all of it. He went back to school, worked while studying, lived in the cheapest, roughest apartments he could find. Then he opened his own workshop, failed, started again, failed again, until finally he succeeded. He now owned a chain of vintage car restoration shops, an office of his own, clients that were celebrities, a career that my grandmother would never be able to sneer at. I asked, "Why did you do all that?" He looked straight into my eyes. His voice dropped low, "Because I wanted to prove your grandmother wrong." My throat closed. For someone who once loved me, he had walked through 7 long years to become a completely new version of himself. Not to take revenge, but to reclaim what had been stolen from him. I left the cafe with a feeling both light and heavy-freed, yet unsettled. I had thought I'd moved on, but in truth, I had only buried everything beneath the frozen surface of success. Stephen came back without apologies, without explanations, but he carried with him something I could no longer ignore. A second chance. The question circled endlessly in my mind. If fate has brought us together again, do I have the courage not to make the same mistake twice? I didn't have the answer yet. But deep down, I knew this wasn't just a reunion. This was the first time in 7 years that I felt I wanted to choose something for myself. Chapter 4. The proposal that made my heart tremble. I thought it was just a chance encounter. 1 cup of coffee, a few polite questions, then each of us returning to our own lives, divided as they had been. But as it turned out, that was only the beginning. We texted in the days that followed. Not constantly, not intensely. Just short exchanges, casual questions like, "Do you still like those waffles at the Riverside Cafe?" "That dress the other day, the navy blue one, you looked beautiful in it," I replied vaguely. But inside, I wasn't vague at all. I began to wait for his messages every morning. Began to pay more attention to myself. Began to feel alive again. A week later, he asked me to meet him again at the same place. The same cafe, the same corner table, the late afternoon sunlight slanting through the glass as if time itself had never moved. But this time, something was different. He wasn't evasive. He didn't bring up the past. He didn't pretend it was coincidence. He looked at me, direct, unflinching, honest. "Crystal, are you happy?" I froze. Everyone asked how successful I was, what I was doing with my career, but no one ever asked if I was happy. That question from him clenched my throat tight. I didn't answer right away. I was afraid I might cry right there in the cafe, but finally I nodded. A small, fragile nod. No, I told the truth. For the first time in 7 years, I shed the armor I had worn like iron. I have a career. I have money. I have a life that looks full, but I'm lonely to the point of heartbreak. Every success of mine has no one to share it with. Am I happy? No. I've only been performing. He listened without interrupting. His eyes never left mine, not for a second. Then he said softly, "Then stop performing." I looked up at him, dazed, as if he were proposing something impossible. "You know your family's gathering is coming up, don't you?" I sighed. How could I forget? My grandmother is probably sharpening her words already. He smiled, but this time it wasn't gentle. It was razor sharp. "Then let her swallow them all." I stared, not understanding what he meant. And then he said the words that left me both stunned and revived. "Let me show up there with you, not as the past, but as the present, as the one you choose. I'll walk in at the right moment, slip a ring onto your finger, and everyone will know Crystal is not pitiful, not a failure, not unwanted. She was only waiting for the right man." My eyes widened. My first instinct was to refuse, to laugh it off, but I couldn't, because inside me, something sparked. A familiar voice whispering, "This is your moment to claim justice, for you, for him, for the love that was stolen from you." I looked at him, saw the same eyes as before, intense but never forcing. "You can say no," he said, as if reading my mind. "But if you say yes, we'll make sure they never dare to belittle you again." I sat there for a long time, silent, weighing, afraid. And then I nodded. "Do it. We'll make sure my grandmother never forgets this reunion." Chapter 5. The Preparation. A revenge plan as subtle as a play. We called it the justice script, but in truth it felt more like an artful act of retribution than any script I had ever seen. After that fateful meeting, Stephen and I sat together in his apartment, a quiet, sunlit place, overlooking the river through wide glass windows. The space wasn't just beautiful, it carried the scent of success. A success my grandmother had once sworn he would never have. We sat at the coffee table, spreading out photographs of my family, as if we were two tacticians mapping out a war without smoke or fire. Uncle Pete avoids eye contact when things get tense, so I'll look him straight in the eye. Mike, the one who smirks, pretends to be indifferent, but he's obsessed with social status. Drop a few big-name clients into the conversation and he'll shrink back. Stephen analyzed like a strategist, and my heart raced because for the first time in years, I wasn't the passive one. We wrote it all down step by step, the entrance. Stephen would arrive precisely when my grandmother unleashed one of her usual barbed remarks. The outfit I would wear, the classic navy dress, her favorite color, to create familiarity, then shatter the obedient image with the brilliance of an engagement ring. The ring. It had to be big, dazzling, enough to silence the entire room for a few seconds. And then we went to buy the ring. Stephen took me to a jewelry store I had only ever dared to admire from outside. marble floors light scattering across hundreds of diamonds. He said only one line when we walked in. "I need a ring that will shut up a sharp tongue, grandmother." We chose a princess-cut 10-carat diamond. When I tried it on, I no longer felt as though I was merely acting. I began to believe. Believe that I deserved to be valued, that I deserved a man like Stephen, not because he was successful, but because he believed that I wasn't his mistake. In the days that followed, we rehearsed lines, eye contact, gestures, like two actors in a play written 7 years ago. Only back then we hadn't been ready to perform it. He taught me how to walk into a room with the stance of a woman who knows exactly what she wants. I taught him how my grandmother manipulated people with her harmless remarks. Each rehearsal reminded me why I had once loved him. But this time, it wasn't the infatuated gaze of youth. It was something deeper, mature empathy. A recognition that we had grown enough to no longer need anyone's permission to love. The night before the gathering, I sat in my room, staring at the dress, hanging silently, and the ring box lying open. My heart didn't pound with nerves, but with hope. Hope that I would reclaim the self I had abandoned 7 years ago because of one cruel remark. And whatever the outcome, I already knew, one thing for certain: tomorrow I would no longer be the crystal of the past. Chapter 6. The Stage of Truth. That morning, I woke up earlier than usual, not out of anxiety, but out of anticipation. It felt like the moments before the most important presentation of my life. But this time, the audience wasn't clients. It was my family. And me, I was no longer the single woman mocked every year. I was a new crystal, a woman ready to speak. The navy dress I chose wasn't to please my grandmother. It was to create an illusion of safety, to make her think this year would be just like the others, that I would smile, endure, bow my head, and let it pass. But no, this year everything would end. I arrived early to help set up chairs and tables just as always. Still the obedient girl wasn't I. I heard Aunt Susan talking about her new plants, Mike buzzing around bragging about work while my mother avoided my eyes as she always did, each of them playing the roles they always played. And then my grandmother entered. She arrived late as usual, exactly 20 minutes after everyone else so that every gaze would turn to her. Dark green dress, pearl collar, a designer handbag, old but meticulously kept. She walked straight to the main table where I was already seated. "Crystal," she called with that familiar voice, loud, decisive, confident, as if my fate still rested in her hands. I stood. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but because I knew the storm had arrived. She didn't let me sit quietly for long. "Still no ring?" she asked, seizing my left hand, as though checking a patient's pulse. 33 years old, Crystal. Even the orphanage wouldn't take someone like you. Around me came awkward laughter, pitying shakes of heads averted eyes. My mother, as always, bowed her head toward her plate, silent. And that was when I smiled. Not the forced smile, not the smile to brush things off, but the smile of someone who knows exactly what is about to happen. "Grandma," I said softly, just loud enough for everyone around to hear. "Perhaps you should save your judgments for after dessert." She frowned. The whole table fell silent. For the first time, I had spoken back calmly. That was something she hadn't expected, and it was at that exact moment the clock struck 2:15. The door swung open, and Stephen walked in. With absolute confidence, charcoal gray suit, black silk tie, neatly combed hair, and a smile that silenced every murmur. He strode straight toward me. Each step pounded against my grandmother's pride. Heads turned. I could hear the whispers. "Is that Stephen? Didn't they break up? Oh my God, look at that ring." Stephen stood before me, smiling. "Sorry I'm late, my love. Traffic was terrible." Then he pulled a velvet box from his pocket. I held out my hand just as we had rehearsed. The ring, 10 carats, blazing like an unspoken declaration, slid onto my finger perfectly. Across the table, my grandmother stammered, her voice faltering. Crystal, what is this? For the first time, I saw confusion in her eyes. I turned to her, smiling, calm. You said I was wasting my youth, didn't you? Well, here it is. I've decided to stop wasting it. With the man you once called unworthy. Stephen leaned down, brushed a kiss against my cheek as if to place a final period on 7 years of endurance, and an ellipsis for everything still to come. Chapter 7. The reversal, the judge becomes the judged. The atmosphere in the room suddenly shifted, as if someone had just pulled the curtain on a stage play and the entire audience went silent, bracing for the twist. My grandmother said nothing. Her eyes darted quickly from the ring on my finger to Stephen's tailored suit. The hands that always held her teacup so firmly now trembled slightly as though the porcelain cup weighed more than she could bear. Around us, family members began to stir. Pitying glances turned to astonishment. A few started whispering to each other, struggling to piece together old memories with the reality before them. Mike, my cousin, who always belittled me, squinted at Stephen as if recognizing a face from a business magazine. Wait, Stephen Martinez, the one who opened that luxury car restoration chain? Martinez Auto Restoration. His voice cracked with disbelief. I didn't have to answer. The way Stephen casually handed Mike his business card with polite, deliberate precision was answer enough. Yes. We just opened our 6th branch in Dallas, Stephen said lightly. Pleasure seeing you again, Mike. Pleasure seeing you again. Not a hint of strain in his voice, but in that handshake was every response to the past. Aunt Susan, the one who had whispered to my mother that Stephen had no future, now forced a nervous smile, mumbling, "Oh." I always knew. Really, I always said Crystal and Stephen were meant to be. Meant to be? I nearly laughed aloud. 7 years ago, that so-called fate had been the very thing they crushed beneath their judgment. Now everyone swarmed like bees to honey. Each wanted to speak to him, each eager to pretend they had supported this love from the beginning. The air thickened with hypocrisy, and still my grandmother sat, silent, until Stephen turned facing her directly. He lowered himself, meeting her eye level, and spoke gently. Mrs. Morrison, I want to thank you. Thank me. Her voice wavered, almost breaking. Yes. The words you said 7 years ago gave me the perfect drive to prove I could do what no one believed I could. Every time I opened a new workshop, every time I signed a major contract, I thought of you. Thank you for not believing in me. Because of that, I learned to believe in myself. Silence fell. No one dared interrupt. No one laughed anymore. My grandmother's face flushed. Her hand clenched the teacup handle. But then, realizing her helplessness, she let go. I only wanted what was best for Crystal. Stephen smiled, not interrupting, but I didn't let it slide. You never wanted what was best for me. You only wanted me to live by your standards. And if I didn't, even if it meant happiness, you would deny it. I didn't shout, I didn't cry, but each word carried the weight of 7 years I had swallowed in silence. Then Stephen extended his hand once more. I hope we can start over, because after all, Crystal and I will be family. She stared at his hand for a long time, and then like a clock forced to tick again after stalling, she reluctantly reached out her handshake, mechanical as though she had no choice but to move along with a script she no longer controlled. 3 phones were raised. That moment captured. My grandmother, the woman who once humiliated Stephen, was now forced to acknowledge him before the entire family. A perfect reversal. Chapter 8. The Mask Falls. When my grandmother was forced to shake Stephen's hand in front of everyone, the entire room froze for a few seconds, as if all of them realized at once the invisible power she had held for so many years had just shattered. That silence was quickly replaced by counterfeit chaos. Aunt Susan leaned toward my mother, speaking low, but just loud enough for me to hear I always knew it. Those two were a perfect match from the start. perfect match. She had been the very first to oppose Stephen, the one who once called him an emotional burden, and Mike, who used to laugh the loudest whenever my grandmother launched her public assaults on me at the dinner table, now edged closer to Stephen Mister. Martinez, that 67 Shelby you restored, are you still taking new clients? He asked it as though he had never openly scorned me for choosing a man who had nothing. Stephen only smiled faintly, offering no promises. And me. I stood in the middle of the crowded room, seeing with painful clarity who was real and who was false. The hugs, the congratulations, the sudden declarations of, I always supported you too. None of it was for me. It was for the ring on my hand, Stephen's tailored suit, and the headlines of his success they were already whispering about. Your daughter is amazing, holding on to a man like that. They look so happy makes me jealous. We're so glad for you, Stephen. Back then, it was just a misunderstanding. Misunderstanding, no. It had been emotional violence disguised as family care. I turned to my mother. She had been silent the entire time. She hadn't stepped forward. She hadn't said a word. I walked over. Aren't you going to congratulate me, Mom? She looked up, her eyes wet not with joy, but with the murky mix of shame and regret. I don't know what to say. All these years I thought I was doing right by staying silent. But do you know, I replied calmly, it was your silence that made me believe I was wrong for choosing what made me happy. No one said anything after that. No one defended my grandmother. No one repeated the old accusations. Everyone saw me with new eyes. But perhaps the greatest change was in how I saw myself. Chapter 9. Choosing myself. Not the role after that spectacular reversal, I became the center of the gathering, but this time not as the subject of ridicule, as the subject of respect. They swarmed to take photos with Stephen and me as if we were some newly announced celebrity couple gracing a magazine cover. They laughed brightly, cheered flattered, as though they hadn't turned their backs on me 7 years ago. Stephen remained composed. He handled every interaction with courtesy and just enough deliberate sharpness. I knew every word, every handshake, every glance was the final shot of our gentle but lethal retaliation. I thought I would feel triumphant, but instead something else crept in. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt liberated. As I pulled away from a cousin's hug, my eyes caught my reflection in the hall's glass pane. The beautiful dress, the dazzling ring, the perfect man beside me. Everything exactly as scripted. And yet, I realized I no longer needed the script. That evening, as Stephen and I sat in the car streetlights, sliding across the windshield like streams of memory, he asked, we did it. Do you feel justice now? I was quiet for a long time. Stephen, thank you. No one but you could have helped me do this, but I realized I don't want to keep living just to prove others wrong. I want to live to be right with myself. He looked at me for a long while, then nodded. I understand. We stopped by the old park where we had dated back in college. We sat in silence, no need to say, let's break up again, because this time there was no breakup, and no reunion either. We just smiled, softly, with gratitude and with freedom. 1 year later, I live in another city now where no one knows I was once the 33-year-old single woman scolded by her grandmother every year. I have a new job, not as grand as the old position, but I'm home by 6 with time to learn pottery, read mystery novels, and grow plants on my balcony. I date again not to prove anything, but simply because my heart stirs. Family still the same, but I no longer tremble at reunions. I am no longer a side character in my own life. I am the protagonist. And if my grandmother were to ask again, still no one to take you home, I would smile, look her straight in the eye, and say, I take myself home. And that's what I'm most proud of. You may be wondering, did Stephen and I get back together? The answer is, we didn't need to. Because after everything I realized, this revenge doesn't always have to come with hatred. We didn't reunite, but we reclaimed what had once been taken from us, our choices, our dignity, and our own voices, and my family. They can continue living with this new version of me, the woman who no longer bows her head. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever been made to feel not good enough, remember, you don't need anyone's approval to be worthy. Don't forget to subscribe and follow Scarlet Vows, where old wounds ignite the fire of revenge.